Good evening, my friends. I want to begin tonight with a question that I need you to take seriously, not as a rhetorical exercise, not as a warm up to the teaching, as a real question asked directly to you in this moment. What have you given up on? Not abandoned carelessly, not let go of wisely because it no longer served you. I mean the desire you buried with grief, the dream you stopped allowing yourself to want because wanting it became too painful, the healing you stopped praying for, the relationship you stopped imagining, the financial freedom you quietly decided was for other people, people with the right connections, the right background, the right luck. I want you to find that thing. Hold it. Don't look away from it yet. Because tonight, I'm going to ask you to look at it very differently than you have before. I'm going to ask you to consider the possibility seriously, not hopefully, but seriously, that the only thing standing between you and that desire is not circumstance, not fate, not the irreversibility of what has already happened. It is a single word, impossible. And that word, that single, devastating, creativity destroying word exists nowhere in the universe except in the mind that thinks it. Let me tell you what impossible actually is. It is not a description of reality. It is a description of your current state of consciousness, from where you stand right now, with the assumptions you currently hold, with the identity you currently inhabit. Yes, some things are impossible. They are impossible from there. The way the horizon is unreachable from where you stand, not because there is no land beyond it, but because the land beyond it exists outside the range of your current position. Move the position, and the horizon moves with it. This is not poetry. This is the precise mechanics of how consciousness creates reality. Every desire you have ever labeled impossible is impossible only from the consciousness that holds the label. From a different state of consciousness, one in which the desire is not a hope but an assumption, not a wish but an accepted fact, that same desire is not only possible, it is inevitable. The word impossible has no meaning in the vocabulary of consciousness itself. Consciousness does not know about impossible. It knows only one thing, and it knows it with perfect, unfailing, merciless precision. What you assume, you experience. Assume limitation, experience limitation. Assume impossibility, experience impossibility. Assume fulfillment from a state of genuine, settled, bone-deep acceptance and experience fulfillment, without exception, without favoritism, without any regard whatsoever for whether what you have assumed contradicts what your circumstances appear to insist. Let me tell you about a woman who came to me in one of the darkest conditions I have ever witnessed. Her son had been missing for 3 years. 3 years. The police had closed the case. Friends had gently, compassionately begun suggesting she find a way to grieve and move forward. Even her closest family had accepted the conclusion that had never been officially stated but hung over everything like smoke. He was gone. She sat in front of me, not hysterical, that stage was long past, but hollowed. The particular emptiness of someone who has been hoping for so long that hope itself has become a source of pain. What can I do? She asked. Everyone says I need to accept reality. I looked at her and said something that, I know, seemed almost cruel in that moment. The only reality you need to accept is that your son is alive, well, and coming home to you. She stared at me. You don't know what happened to him. No, I said. But I know something far more important than what happened. I know what consciousness does. And I know that if you can imagine your son walking through your door, healthy, present, whole, and if you can feel the reality of that reunion with every cell of your body, that imaginal act must manifest. I gave her one instruction. Every night before sleep, hear his key in the lock. Feel his arms around you. Smell his familiar scent. Have the conversation you'll have the evening he returns. Live in that reality so completely that his absence becomes the dream and his presence becomes the truth you occupy. 6 weeks later, she called me. Her son had contacted the police. He had been in another state, suffering from amnesia following an accident, living under an identity he didn't know wasn't his. His memory had returned suddenly, completely, and he was coming home. I tell you this story not for its drama. I tell it because it illustrates something that is easy to agree with in theory and very hard to practice in the moments when life is pressing against you with everything it has. There are no impossible things. There are only assumptions you haven't dared to make. Now, I want to ask you to think carefully about something. Why do most people fail to manifest what they consider impossible? It is not because they don't want it badly enough. Some of the most desperate desire I have ever witnessed has gone unfulfilled for years. Intensity of wanting is not the issue. It is not because they don't practice the techniques. Many people visualize faithfully, affirm daily, study these teachings with extraordinary commitment and still wait. The reason is this: they are trying to manifest the impossible while maintaining the consciousness of impossibility. They are sitting down to their visualization practice, carrying underneath the scene the weight of a belief that whispers, "But this probably won't work." But this is different from the cases I've heard about. But my situation is more complicated. But it's been too long. But the damage is too great. And that whisper, that deep, structural, heavily grooved assumption running underneath the surface of the practice is more powerful than the scene being visualized above it. Because consciousness does not read your visualization. Consciousness reads your assumption. And if your assumption is underneath everything, this is impossible, then that is what manifests. Not the scene, the state. This is why I say to you with great seriousness tonight, you cannot manifest the impossible while remaining in the consciousness of impossibility. You must first become the person for whom the so-called impossibility is natural, normal, and already done. Not try to become, not work toward becoming. Become through assumption, through the willingness to inhabit a state of consciousness before the physical evidence arrives to justify it. I want to tell you about a man who arrived at one of my lectures who had been told by every qualified medical authority he could find that he would never walk again. A spinal injury, 2 years in a wheelchair, multiple specialists, all in agreement, permanent, irreversible. After he heard these teachings, something shifted in him. Not immediately, the shift was quiet, private, almost tentative at first. But he made a decision. He would no longer accept the verdict of his circumstances as the final word on his reality. Every night, in the state between waking and sleep, he imagined himself walking, not as a distant hope, not as a prayer for someday, as a present, sensory, felt reality. He told me later, "Neville, I didn't just see myself walking. I felt the ground beneath my feet. I felt my muscles moving. I felt what it is to be in a body that moves freely. I made it so real that sometimes I would wake up surprised to find myself still in the wheelchair." His family worried about his mental state. His doctors recommended counseling. He persisted. 8 months in, something began, something the doctors had no framework for. Tingling in his legs, then sensation, then slowly movement returning where there had been none. 18 months after he began, he walked. The medical community called it unexplained, a spontaneous recovery outside the known parameters of his injury type. He knew exactly what had happened. He had dared to assume what every authority in his life told him was impossible, and he had persisted in that assumption until it was more real to him than his circumstances. Until the assumption hardened into fact, because that is the law. Let me say something now that I need you to hear clearly, because it is the place where most people make their error. Manifesting the impossible is not about overcoming obstacles. I want to say that again. It is not about overcoming obstacles. It is about rising to a state of consciousness in which those obstacles simply do not exist. There is a profound difference between a person who is fighting to make something happen and a person who is being someone for whom it has already happened. The first person is at war with their circumstances. The second person has simply moved to a different address. The first person is trying to climb a wall. The second person is standing on the other side of it. You cannot climb your way to the state of the wish fulfilled. You cannot struggle your way there. You cannot force your way there. You can only assume your way there. By doing what seems to the rational mind utterly backward, behaving as though the arrival has already occurred, before the physical evidence has appeared to confirm it. This is what the teaching means when it says, believe that you have received, and you shall receive. Not believe you will receive, not work to receive, not pray to receive. Believe you have received. Past tense. Already done. Complete. Because from the perspective of consciousness, which is the only perspective that actually creates anything, it is already done. Every state you could ever inhabit already exists. Creation is finished. Your desire is not a future event waiting to be created. It is an already existing reality waiting for you to move in. Now let me speak about the young man who cleaned offices. He was a janitor. No degree, no connections, no money, no industry contacts. And he wanted with a burning, specific, unshakable desire to be a film director. Everyone around him performed the mathematics of his situation with cheerful competence and arrived at the same answer. Impossible. But he had heard something in these teachings that most people hear and do not truly register. There is a difference between thinking about your desire and thinking from it. Thinking about your desire. I want to be a director. I hope to be a director one day. I am working toward becoming a director. Thinking from your desire. I am a director. This is who I am. What I am currently doing with my time is temporary. It does not define me. He made that shift. And it changed everything, not immediately in the outer world, but in the quality of what he noticed, what he was drawn to, who he encountered, what opportunities became visible to him. Because here is what happens when you genuinely shift your inner identity. The world doesn't change immediately, but you do. And because you have changed, you move through the world differently. You notice different things. You say different things in conversations. You are drawn to different people and different rooms and different possibilities. You stop being invisible to the very circumstances that were always there, but were outside the range of your previous self-concept. Within 3 years, not 30, not through a lucky break, but through the inevitable unfolding of a persistently held assumption, he had written, produced, and directed a film that won awards at several festivals. Not because the universe made an exception for him, because the law worked exactly as it always works. Assumption, persisted in, must manifest. I want to address something now that I know is stirring in some of you. The cases I've described tonight, the missing son, the paralysis, the impossible reconciliation, these are not small asks. These are not minor adjustments to comfortable circumstances. These are the kinds of desires that the entire weight of conventional wisdom, medical science, psychological expertise, and lived experience conspires to label impossible. And I know that some of you are thinking, yes, but my situation is truly different. My case is actually impossible. Those stories might be real, but mine is different. I want to name that thought clearly. That thought is the limitation, not your circumstances, not the evidence, not the medical report, or the estrangement, or the debt, or the years that have passed. The thought that says mine is different, that thought is the only thing that separates you from what those people experience. Because consciousness does not grade on a curve. It does not have a list of conditions. It considers genuinely impossible, as distinguished from the merely difficult. It does not evaluate your case and decide whether you qualify for a miracle. It only responds to what you most deeply, most consistently, most genuinely assume. And if you assume underneath your practice, underneath your desire, underneath your hope, that yours is the exception, the case that even consciousness cannot reverse, that assumption will manifest. Not because it's true, but because consciousness delivers the physical equivalent of whatever you are being. So the question I am really asking you tonight is not, do you believe the impossible can happen? The question is, are you willing to become the person for whom this specific impossibility is not impossible? Because that becoming, that identity shift, that willingness to inhabit a state before the evidence arrives, is the entire work. Now let me tell you what that work actually looks like. It is not primarily what you do at night before sleep, though that practice matters. It is not primarily the vividness of your visualization, though that matters too. It is what you are being throughout the day, in the small, unguarded moments, in the texture of your ordinary hours. It is the woman who desired reconciliation with her estranged daughter, 15 years of silence, bitter words, complete refusal of contact, who began to live inside a reality where the reconciliation had already occurred. She would imagine conversations with her daughter, feel the warmth of their renewed connection, experience the ease of a relationship restored. She tells me that sometimes she would reach for the phone to call her daughter and then remember with a mild surprise that they were not yet speaking. Not yet speaking. Do you hear the consciousness in that phrase? Not never speaking again. Not probably never speaking again. Not the doctors say it's permanent, but not yet. A temporary condition from the perspective of someone who already inhabits the reality of the reconciliation. For months, nothing appeared to change externally, but everything was changing in the world of consciousness. She was becoming, with every imagined conversation, with every felt moment of their restored relationship, someone for whom this reconciliation was not a dream, but a memory of the future inevitable, already real, simply not yet visible in the physical world. Then one day, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with the quiet precision of consciousness delivering exactly what it always delivers, the phone rang. Her daughter, Mom. I don't know why, but I've been thinking about you constantly. I miss you. Can we talk? Was this caused by the imagining? Or did the imagining simply align the mother with a reality that was always available, always waiting, needing only for someone on this side to accept it? I say to you, those are not different questions. Alignment is causation. Let me say something about persistence, because this is where the teaching becomes demanding. The impossible, or what you have labeled impossible, takes longer to appear, not because it is more difficult for consciousness. Consciousness does not experience difficulty. It experiences only assumption and its manifestation. It takes longer because it requires a more complete death of the old self. The person who wants a modest improvement in their circumstances can sometimes manifest it with a partial shift in consciousness. The old identity remains largely intact, and the new assumption coexists with it without much conflict. But when you are manifesting something that contradicts every external fact, a physical healing that contradicts medical science, a financial reversal that contradicts economic reality, a relationship reconciliation that contradicts years of confirmed estrangement, you are asking for a complete replacement of the old identity with a new one. And that is not a quick process. The old self fights, not from malice, but from the fierce, primitive, deeply grooved instinct of self-preservation. The old consciousness, the one that has organized your entire life around the belief in your limitation, does not simply step aside and wish the new one well. It presents evidence. It argues. It points to every fact that confirms the impossibility you are trying to transcend. It brings in allies, well-meaning friends, qualified experts, statistical realities, the weight of all previous experience. It says, look, just look. How can you believe this in the face of all this? And here is what you must understand. That resistance is not evidence that the assumption is wrong. It is evidence that the assumption is working. Because the old consciousness only fights that hard when it feels genuinely threatened. When the new assumption is so real, so persistently held, so fully inhabited, that the old self recognizes it as a genuine challenger, the resistance is the friction of genuine change. Do not mistake it for proof of failure. When doubt appears, and it will, do not engage with it, do not argue with it, do not try to reason your way past it. Simply redirect, quietly and firmly, back to the assumption, back to the state, back to the consciousness of the person for whom this is already done. Every redirect strengthens the new assumption. Every time you choose the inner knowing over the outer appearance, you are casting a vote for the new identity. And eventually, through persistence, through faithfulness, through the sheer accumulated weight of repeated choice, the new consciousness becomes stronger than the old. The assumption hardens into fact, and what was impossible becomes what happened. I want to give you the practical core of this. Every night, in those fertile moments before sleep, when the conscious mind quiets and the deeper mind becomes receptive, I want you to enact a scene. Not a scene of hoping, not a scene of almost, not a scene of it might be happening. A scene that could only exist if your impossible desire were already fully accomplished. If it is a healing, feel the vitality in every cell. Move freely through your scene. Let your body express what it would express if the healing were complete. If it is a financial reversal, feel the specific quality of peace that comes from security. Not excitement, peace. The quiet, settled, exhaling peace of someone who has nothing to worry about in that domain. If it is a relationship, have the conversation. Feel the warmth. Let the connection be so real in your imagination that the absence, when you open your eyes, is the thing that seems like the dream. Make the scene so vivid, so emotionally inhabited, so sensorially complete that your nervous system cannot distinguish it from physical reality. And then, this is crucial, carry the feeling of that scene into your waking life, not the scene itself. The feeling underneath the scene, the feeling of someone for whom this is normal, for whom this is already done, for whom the impossible has long since become simply what is. Walk with that feeling, speak from it, make your decisions from it. When someone asks how things are going, answer from the state of someone who lives in the fulfilled reality, not by lying, but by the way your whole being orients toward what you know to be true in consciousness. This is not performance. This is becoming. I want to close with something that I believe is the most important thing I will say tonight. You are not a human being trying to use a law to get what you want. You are consciousness itself, infinite, creative, unlimited consciousness, temporarily experiencing itself through the lens of a particular set of assumptions. The limitations you feel are real. I am not dismissing them. They are as real as any physical object because they are made of exactly the same substance, solidified assumption, but they are not permanent. They are not inherent. They are not the truth of what you are. They are the residue of what you have been assuming, and assumptions can be changed. Not easily, perhaps, not instantly, in most cases, but completely and permanently through the willingness to inhabit a new state before the evidence arrives to justify it. This is the courage I am asking of you tonight. Not the courage to fight your circumstances. The circumstances will yield, they always yield, to a consciousness that has genuinely moved beyond them. The courage to inhabit what seems absurd. To stand in the assumption of your healed body while the pain is still present. To walk in the consciousness of abundance while the debt is still real. To live in the felt reality of your reconciled relationship while the silence continues. To be the director while you are still cleaning the office. This is not delusion. This is the most precise, clear-eyed understanding of how reality actually forms. The inner precedes the outer, always, without exception. The assumption creates the circumstance, not the other way around. And you, the person sitting here tonight, are the operant power in your own world, not a victim of it, not a passenger in it, the cause of it. So I leave you tonight with one challenge. Find the thing you have labeled impossible, the desire you have buried, the dream you have stopped allowing yourself to want, and just dare to assume it is already done. Not perfectly, not without doubt, not with the certainty of someone who has never feared, but with the willing, courageous, choice-based assumption of someone who has decided that this is the reality I will inhabit, regardless of what the evidence says. For as long as it takes for the law to do what the law always does, persist, return when you drift, deepen when you can, and watch with the quiet astonishment of someone who has finally understood that miracles are simply the law, operating without obstruction as the impossible reveals itself to have been inevitable all along. The impossible is not waiting for permission. It is waiting for you. Dare to assume, dare to persist, dare to become the version of yourself for whom the impossible is already simply what is. Good night. This is Neville Lectures. I'll see you again in the next video.